Chris Conrad, author of Hemp Lifeline to the Future. I met Chris back in the late 1980s when the hemp industry was a distant dream. Chris understood that somebody needed to put together a trade organization. Before there were hempsters, we had the Business Alliance for Commerce in Hemp. That's how forward-thinking Chris Conrad is. He decided that Jack's little pamphlet needed to get big and go mainstream, and became the editor of The Emperor Wears No Clothes original edition, and has continued on, and his current voice is the West Coast Leaf. Everybody pick yourself up a copy. It's a great journal of what's really going on out here, and the whole country needs to see this. Chris Conrad.
Hey, thank you a lot, Don. I appreciate that. Yeah, Don is like a champion too. It's great to be here today. I really appreciate you guys being out here. Like Don was saying, though, it's what started me on this whole thing. I've always worked with news media and with progressive politics, and I was told by a group of progressive activists that you could never change the marijuana laws, that we'd be stuck with them as they were. And I disagree with that. I think that knowledge is power, and power makes change. And so if I could create enough knowledge, that would give people the power to make the change that was necessary. So I started off by doing brochures and things like that. And as Don mentioned, I quickly recognized that I wanted to have a book out there. And so I came across like a newspaper thing called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And it took me 6 months to get hold of Jack Herer and convince him that it was time to put into a real book form and go forward. So we revised the book in 1990, and I started writing my own things and so forth. But I was on the periphery of the media for quite a bit, and one of the things that I was noticing was I could influence the media to a certain extent from where I was, but it was not particularly satisfying. I remember, for example, when I got hold of the Wall Street Journal, and I worked with them to put together an article about hemp and how it was the coming wave of the future and so forth. And then I arranged for them to do an interview with Jack Herer. And so Jack, when the reporter walked in, Jack pulled out a joint and started smoking it. And so instead of doing the whole article on hemp, they decided to do a personality piece on Jack Herer, the crusader for hemp who smokes pot in front of reporters. And so it was an interesting story, but it was rather disappointing to me because I was not looking for a personality piece at that point. I was looking for something major, which it kind of was, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. And we kept doing events here and there. We found out that if you wanted to do a press conference, you wanted to get the media to show up, you promised them coffee and donuts. You have a much higher rate of having them show up than if you don't. And I remember one particular event that we did where we had speakers coming from all over the country to, I don't remember if it was Sacramento or Los Angeles, one of those two. And you know, with a lot of news coverage, a lot of cameras there, and then we watched the News Hour report, and they basically didn't really cover what any of the speakers said or what we were about. They went around the edges of they talked to people who were saying, well, I don't know what this is all about today. And people who said, well, I don't think pot should be legalized anyway, who happened to walk by in the street. So it's like the news specifically ignored what we had to say in order to cover people who looked like we didn't know what was going on. And so my experience with the news media is that I talk to them a lot. I don't get mentioned very often, but I influence what happens in the articles and so forth. And so that's one way of getting some power out of things, but we came to the conclusion that we wanted to do a little bit more than that. And I know a lot of people start magazines and things just because they like the pretty pictures of pot. And I know that people like to do the radio shows, which I like to do, but I don't have the commitment to be there every week to do something like that. So I got together with a guy named Richard Lee, who's founder of Oaksterdam University, and another fellow, and we put together the Oaksterdam News, which was a quarterly newspaper from 2005 to 2007. And we were quite effective, excepting the thing is we had a little different approaches because Richard didn't want us to put anything, any bad news in the paper. He wanted it to all be good news. And to me, I think you just really can't ignore the amount of bad news that's going on. So we had this kind of a perpetual little conflict about how we cast all the articles. Fortunately, that was saved when our third partner went off and took the money, bankrupted us. So yeah, we didn't have to argue about that anymore. But luckily, my wife, Mickey Norris, it took me a year to convince her that we really needed to make progress with the newspaper again. So we came up with the West Coast Leaf, and what we cover in every issue is that we want to have articles from all over the country, primarily on the West Coast. We want to have photos from all over the place. We want to cover events all over. But mainly what we're trying to do is to spread information about who's doing what they're achieving, and how other people can do something similar in their area. And if they want to get involved with an issue, who do they talk to, and how do they become activists? Because function of our newspaper, unlike most newspapers, which is to kind of give you something to read over your coffee, our function is to give you something that you can then get pissed off enough about that you decide to go home and do something about it, and you have very specific things that you can do about it. And you know the names of the people to do it, and you know the name of the court ruling that might affect your life, and you know the recent decisions that have been happening on the state legislative level, on the national level, and so forth. And I think this is extremely important because, let me just take the case of Obama right now. There's a lot of people who feel very disillusioned with Barack Obama as president. Somebody said to me, well, he's the best president that they'll let us have. You know, if he was any better than that, they would have killed him by now. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I do know that a lot of people I talk to are quite disillusioned with him. And yet, if you really follow what's going on with Barack Obama, on our issue in particular, you find that he has delivered in spades like no other president that we have ever had before. Obama came forward. Yeah, he deserves a big hand right now because whatever he's done elsewhere, aside from the fact that he's bringing the troops out of Iraq as he promised, on our issue in particular, the first thing he did soon after taking office was he announced that Eric Holder would be his Attorney General, and Eric Holder did a statement that we're going to follow the promise to end the medical marijuana raids. And of course, then the DEA raided a bunch of places the next day to say, we don't care what the president does. Well, soon after that, they got the memo on factual science, which said that they have to use science instead of political beliefs as a basis of their decisions, which is a huge threat to the DEA. As you were hearing, the DEA they're using lies to keep marijuana illegal. The president has ordered them, they have to redo their work based upon scientific accuracy. The president then came back and issued a memo saying that the federal government does not have the right to preempt states on criminal laws and so forth, and that in fact the states should be encouraged to diversify from the federal policies in order to create greater experimentation. He quoted Supreme Court Justice Brandeis that the states are a laboratory for democracy, and he brought that out, and so he again told the government, the DEA, to leave us alone, and then still the raids continued, and then in October of last year, he issued the memo which said specifically that the DEA is supposed to leave people alone in states where who are compliant with the state medical marijuana laws in their states. And so, we've got this long track record of it, and as you may have heard recently, the Veterans Administration has changed their policy to allow veterans to use medical marijuana in states where it's legal. If you thought George Bush would let that happen, if you think John McCain would have let that happen, if you think Sarah Palin would have let that happen, you got some rethinking to do. And so, we have to recognize these things, and we have to keep putting into the front, because what the opposition is trying to do is make us feel disillusioned with Obama and disillusioned with the Democrats so that we let the Republicans come back and take power again. And I'm not taking this from a partisan point of view. I'm taking it from the point of view of who has delivered what that does good for us. Who came through with the health care program? Who came through with these decisions about allowing for medical marijuana? Who came through for us over and over again? Who's pulling us out of Iraq? It's the Democrats. And so for the people to say all politicians are alike is the same, is to fall into the lies that are being put forth by Rupert Murdoch and that spewing nonsense factory known as Fox News. Now, we have a similar issue when it comes to the West Coast Leaf, and I'm going to encourage everyone to take a copy, which is that we have a situation in California right now over Prop 19 where some people who are making money off of the current situation like to project it that somehow there's something so terribly flawed about Prop 19 that we, even though we use marijuana, should be voting against it. And a lot of this is based upon one thing. It's a guy named Dennis Perrone, good friend of mine, who decided to take it upon himself to spread false information about the initiative. But because he was so known within the medical marijuana circles, people just believed it. And in fact, it's gotten into the the Los Angeles Times, and it's gotten into the Sacramento News that this law will create new felonies. That is absolutely factually a lie. It is false information. But the news media, because Dennis Perrone, who is their hero of medical marijuana, is saying it, they don't recheck and read the initiative to find out what it really says. And so one of the things that people say to us, oh, we should get both sides of the argument. Well, I'll tell you what, we do not publish lies. There's plenty of people publishing lies out there. If you want to get the government side of lies about the initiative, you go to any other newspaper and they will tell you the government's lies. Our job is to screen it out and make sure that what you're getting is accurate. And so you're not going to get Dennis Perrone's fake idea of what the initiative does. When you read the West Coast Leaf, you're going to find out what the initiative really does. When you read our newspaper, if we make a mistake, we're going to come back to the next issue and clean it up and let you know what that mistake was. We're not going to feed you a bunch of stuff. So then your question is, how do you benefit from the work that we're willing to put in? And this is how you do it. You write us an article that tells us what you're doing. You do it with a news hook. You give us a good photograph that shows us something going on and a nice little caption that explains it. But you have to write in good, plain English. I'm talking about a direct declaratory sentence. I want to start off with, somebody did something important and this is why it's important to you, and they did it on such of a date and where they did it. I don't want October the 5th was a historic day for people all over the world who like to smoke pot, and then the radio's kind of, it's like, hello, I want to know what happened. Every day is a historic day because the next day is gone, It's not that it's a historic day that's important. What we need to know is what really happened. And we also, I know people like to write stuff in very roundabout, couched ways. I just like to say, the more specific, the more direct, the more clear you can be, the more likely you are to get your report into our paper. If you get into our hands, we're going to put it out, 150,000 plus copies. We're going to get spread all around the country. And other publications read ours, and then they cover it. For example, the story about the airports in California that'll let people fly with medical marijuana now, we're the ones who broke that story. And we also, we wrote one story about a guy who had been framed by the cops, and the cop who we've said was involved in framing him then went and helped the guy get out so that so that people would not think he was a bad guy, because people read in the West Coast Leaf that he was being an asshole, and they told him that he was being an asshole, and he actually went and helped out the guy that we had reported that he had screwed over, and he said, I didn't really mean for that to happen. So, the power is right here, and we get the information from you, so I've got to stop, but please, keep giving us your articles. We're going to make sure that they get out to the rest of the world, and we're going to make sure that they get the true story, not the bullshit.
Thank you, Chris Conrad.